For public university, a 1970s student paid $400 for 1 year of tuition. Searching the pockets of our jeans and underneath our couch cushions could cover half of that. That translates to $2,800 adjusted for 2020.
That's insane, dude. That is insane. You used to be able to work at McDonald's and put yourself through law school, bro, and come out the other end barely in debt. And now? Oh my gosh. I mean, you got to sell your f***ing kidney. This is why Gen Z are the poorest generation. Video by the Infographics Show. So, apparently y'all niggas are broke. What's going on?
Good news, the average Gen Zer in the workforce now has a net worth of $22,000. Wait, no, that's a mistake. Negative $22,000.
Ooh. Y'all spawning in debt? That's crazy.
So, what's the actual good news? By the time they hit 27, the average Gen Zer will finally have a positive net worth of $8,142. Hey, progress is progress. But how did Gen Z get this way? Is it really all that avocado toast spending? Or was that the millennials? Today on the Infographic Show, we'll dive deep into the depressing story of why Gen Z is the poorest generation ever.
Jeez,
it's no surprise
man.
that Gen Z is struggling. And a big part of the problem comes down to money. Take Maddie, a 25-year-old working at a senior living home in Pennsylvania. She puts it bluntly, everyone is going to be in debt their whole life. I don't want to be, but I have this feeling that no matter what I do, no matter how hard I work, there is always going to be some kind of debt that I have. It's a legitimate concern, but why don't they just try working for a change? Pull themselves up by their good old bootstraps.
Right.
Well, apparently they do work. It just doesn't seem to help them much. One Gen Z Reddit user shared this fond memory about their first full-time job. My first full-time job was at Deloitte, and they paid me $36,000 in 2019. I went into credit card debt to pay for the train to work. A full 59% of Gen Z reported feelings of stress and anxiety about their finances.
Yeah, man, I think that's one of the most out-of-touch takes that people have about Gen Z, that they're lazy. From what I've seen and from what I've experienced working with Gen Z people is that they are one of the hardest working generations. And they start working a lot younger.
A full 59% of Gen Z reported feelings of stress and anxiety about their finances, the highest of any generation. While Gen Z is generally stress and anxiety prone, it turns out that they have some very real reasons to be concerned.
Yeah, we just talked about that yesterday. Gen Z is probably the most stressed generation.
Wages are bad, debts are up, and why is all this happening? Well, let's see what the data tells us. As of 2023, 10.5 million teens and adults aged 13 to 27, or 16% of Gen Z, live in poverty, the highest of any generation.
Oh, broke! Broke!
Except Alpha. Things are so bad that Bank of America recently discovered 46% of Gen Z adults need financial assistance from their family to stay afloat. And it's not because they're lazy. Most of them are working full-time, and a significant chunk of them are working more than one job.
Whoa.
In fact, 53% of Gen Z have a side hustle on top of their full-time job just to make ends meet. That could mean driving for Uber.
That's tough.
Which, by the way, 24% of adult Gen Zers do, or selling handmade stuff on.
24% of Gen Zers in America drive Uber? Wow. That's crazy. I remember when Uber just came out, Uber was a great way to make money. I was working at a Dick's Sporting Goods when Uber really started to take off, and there was this chick that was working there, and she quit her job. She's like, oh, I'm just going to do Uber. I was like, what the fuck is Uber? She's like, yeah, I'm just going to do Uber. I got a friend in San Francisco. They're making like over $2,000 a week or some crazy shit like that, dude. It was ridiculous compared to what we were making in a weekly basis.
Online. And then there are the online services that we'd rather not get into. But you gotta do what you gotta do, right?
Oh, OnlyFans? Yeah, man.
Many young adults who don't already have a side hustle are planning to get one just to survive their 20s. In fact, 51% of Gen Z plans to monetize a hobby because nothing makes your favorite pastime more enjoyable than needing it to afford groceries.
That's crazy.
Despite that, the same Bank of America...
Bro, everyone's going to have a YouTube channel by 2030. Literally, it's going to be like, if you're not making content, you're not even trying. It's like how 20 years ago, if you weren't planning to go to college or university out of high school, you weren't really trying to make the most out of your life if that was an opportunity available to you. That is what content creation is going to be in 5 to 10 years. If you're not also making content on top of whatever it is you're studying or whatever field you're working in, you're not really trying to get ahead.
Survey found that 60% of Gen Z adults don't have enough savings to cover 3 months of expenses. So if they get fired or they have an emergency, many turn to credit cards. The New York Fed found that 1 in 7 Gen Z adults have already maxed out their credit cards.
Wow.
And that is not just a short-term problem. It wrecks their credit history, making it harder to get loans, rent apartments, and even qualify for better financial opportunities. Oh, and saving for the future? Yeah, that's not happening. We'll get into why Gen Z is racking up debt soon, and despite what Instagram might have you believe, it's not because of champagne brunches and Santorini photo shoots. The real issue is that credit card companies themselves have changed, and not in a way that helps. In fact, many of those changes have put Gen Z at a serious disadvantage. According to Wallet Hub, the average credit card interest rate reached an all-time peak in August 2024, maxing out at 21.76%. In comparison, just 10 years earlier, millennials trying to pay off credit card debt only had to deal with an average interest rate of 11.82%.
That's crazy.
Higher interest rates means that any unpaid credit card balances rack up interest much faster than they normally would. That makes the goal of eventually paying off credit cards harder and harder. Bankrate credit card analyst Ted Rossman says, to be just starting out and already falling behind the 8 ball can be a tough cycle to break. And it's not like Gen Z is just mindlessly splurging on their credit cards. Despite all the criticism they get in the media, only 5.5% of Gen Z's average spending is on dining out, compared to 5% for other ages. Keeping in mind that Gen Z also spends much less than other ages overall. But Moody's Analytics found that the young adult generation is spending much more of their income on necessities compared to other generations, mostly on rent, according to a 2022 American Community Survey by Zillow, a site that may as well sell unicorns for how realistically Gen Z can actually buy a home. 3 in 5 renters aged 18 to 25 spend more than 30% of their income on housing. And in 21 of the largest U.S. cities, that number is even higher. That being said, some of Gen Z's spending is definitely impulse buys. Gen Z tends to scroll TikTok and Instagram like crazy, platforms where half of the creators are trying to sell something. 44% of Gen Z takes influencer recommendations into account when purchasing products. This can result in a lot of regret over overpriced skincare and supplements that either have testosterone-boosting abilities or just ground-up flour in them. There would be no way to know. Not to mention, after all the world shut down in 2020, something else that influenced Gen Z's prospects in crazy ways, as you'll soon see, a lot of people wanted to blow off steam and go out and live after being locked down for months. And, well, living requires paying. How can Gen Z even start paying off so much credit card debt? One option is to go back to their childhood bedrooms, and a lot of Gen Z never left them in the first place. In terms of staying with their parents, Gen Z outperforms even the youth of the Great Depression, a contest that no one has ever wanted to win. In July 2020, the Pew Research Center discovered that
Imagine that. It was easier to move out of your parents' home and get your own spot during the Great Depression than it is today. Insane.
52% of young adults lived with at least one of their parents. This set a new record, as the previous highest share was only 48%, recorded in 1940. Now, you might be thinking, hey, wait a minute, July 2020 was right after the pandemic hit. That can't be the general state of things. And you're right, because in February of 2020, just as COVID was starting the world tour, the number of young adults living with their parents was only 47%. Hovering just a percentage point below the tail end of the Great Depression is never a good sign.
Right.
And with 56% of Gen Z saying they live paycheck to paycheck, rent isn't just expensive, it's a dead end. How are they supposed to save money or pay off student loans when the jobs they got because of those loans barely even cover the bills? But Gen Z is working, so what gives? The answer is the insanely high cost of living and the refusal of wages to match it. In 2022, Gen Z was paying 31% more for housing than millennials were just a decade before them, adjusted for inflation. and millennials were already getting a bad deal. Gen Z and millennials pay on average almost 100% more for their homes than baby boomers in the 1970s.
Yeah, I don't want to hear shit from baby boomers or any generation that predates millennials. Y'all could literally buy a house for 4 bottle caps and a pop, because y'all didn't even call it soda back then. Fucking geezers.
In 1975, the average home in the U.S. cost $42,600.
Bro, that's a fucking Camry. Oh, man.
Or $244,700 when adjusted with
Okay, all right, fine.
2024 inflation rates.
Still, that's amazing, though. The average home, $244K, that's a steal today. You'll be very lucky to find a home that price in Texas. Let's not even mention places like Florida or New York or California. Good luck.
In 2024, however,
right.
the average home cost just over $512,000. And if you're looking in major metro areas where top universities and booming job markets are supposed to offer better opportunities, the prices are even worse.
Bro, this is actually insane that houses are getting more expensive. Why? Because technology is improving. Notice how pretty much every other aspect of life, things are far cheaper now, technologically. Whether that be computers, devices, entertainment systems, even cars. Yeah, a car is pretty expensive today, but what you're getting, I mean, what you spend on average for a car now, what you get if you teleport that car back 40, 50 years, you're pretty much in the most luxurious car. Like a modern Honda Accord is shitting on even a BMW, a Porsche from 40 years ago, bro. Like completely shitting on it, wiping its ass with it. And so you can get pretty cheap cars if you're willing to buy used or get the basic model of whatever car you're getting. And it's still going to be far superior to what you would have gotten brand new 30 years ago, let's say, right? Well, why is the same not happening with housing? I am sure the technology when it comes to construction has also improved. And so we should and probably are able to build homes for cheaper and faster than before. But yet, things are only getting more expensive. And so that tells me that there is some bullshit happening behind the scenes. Somebody is putting their finger on the scale somewhere, man. Someone is racking up, is artificially inflating the price of housing by making something difficult, because it's a supply and demand issue, obviously. But somewhere along the line, someone is making it incredibly hard to just build more houses in America.
And that's not the only cost of living to shoot up over the decades either. From 2012 to 2022, car insurance payments more than doubled, even accounting for inflation, and health insurance spending went up 46%.
Insane, dude.
While wages also went up, they only increased by an inflation-adjusted 26%. That doesn't even cover the higher housing prices, never mind everything else. And that's just comparing Gen Z to millennials. Things get even worse when you stack them up against baby boomers. Back when the boomers were in their 20s, they had 86% more purchasing power than Gen Z does today.
Wow.
Imagine walking into a boomer's house at 25, yes, an actual house at 25, that's not a myth, and tossing out 17 of every 20 things they owned. What's left is the equivalent of what Gen Z can buy today, compared to boomers at the same age.
Wow.
Not to mention, boomers weren't drowning in as much debt. When it comes to credit cards, Gen Z unfortunately owns the most. TransUnion found that the average Gen Zer's debt totaled around 16% of their income at the end of 2023. Millennial debt totaled 12% of their income 10 years before that. Gen Z is also much more likely to fall behind on credit cards and car payments because they can't afford them. But the biggest expense for most of Gen Z is by far college. The average Gen Zer owes $20,900 in student loans. That's a 14% increase on what millennials owed at the same age. And more of them owe it. 36% of young adults aged 20 to 25 have student loan debt, which is 5 percentage points higher than millennials when they were that age. It may be easy for older generations to just say, so don't go to college. But the job market has drastically changed since the days of, why don't you walk into that office with a resume and a firm handshake and ask if they're hiring? Now the labor market is much more competitive, it's harder to get into in the first place, and the percentage of jobs that require a college degree has shot up. Back in 1973…
Bro, this is why when people talk about how your environment doesn't dictate the course of your life, and it doesn't do it ultimately, regardless of who you are, where you were born, what situation you were born into, if you receive the necessary knowledge and understanding, you can become anything, you can accomplish anything. I truly believe that. However, if you are born into a family where, one, your parents own their home, and so you never have to pay rent until you're ready to buy your own home. So you don't have to rack up debt. All that money you would have been spending on rent, you can save it. But then on top of that, if you have educated parents, or at least intelligent and aware parents that can make sure that if you go to university, if you go to college, you're going to go for a field to acquire a skill that is going to make you incredibly competitive in the job market. And man, if you don't have that, your life is so much harder. If you're not set up like that at birth, you're born to a single parent household, you're born into a poor family that rents their home instead of owning their home. You're born into a situation where your parents don't have higher education and really can't give you much guidance in terms of what you should go to university for, what's actually worth going into student loan debt for, or even better, if your parents, can afford to pay for your college, at least a significant amount of your college. If that's not your situation, your life is objectively more difficult to begin with. You have so much more to overcome.
When a lot of boomers were just starting out in the job market, only 28% of jobs required any kind of higher education, whether it was an associate's, a bachelor's, or beyond. Fast forward to 2018, and that number had jumped to 63%. And if college feels like a necessity for the workforce now, it's only going to get worse in the future. The same report projected that by 2031, 72% of jobs will require some form of higher education, with 42% needing at least a bachelor's degree just to be considered. So, forget about college then is not really an option for most of Gen Z, because the costs keep getting higher. Specifically, since the 1970s, the cost of private school tuition and fees have gone up by 2,107%. And the cost of even public school tuition has gone up by 2,580%. Well, surely inflation will make that number sound slightly less terrible, right? Right? Unfortunately, not, because those numbers have already been adjusted for inflation. For private school, the average boomer student in 1970 paid $1,600 for 1 year of tuition, which translates to $12,000 adjusted for 2022 inflation. In 2022, that same tuition cost $41,600. Wow. And of course, the prestigious private universities generally run much higher than that. For public university, a 1970s student paid $400 for 1 year of tuition. Searching the pockets of our jeans and underneath our couch cushions could cover half of that. That translates to $2,800 adjusted for 2020.
That's insane, dude. That is insane. You used to be able to work at McDonald's and put yourself through law school, bro, and come out the other end barely in debt. And now? Oh my gosh. I mean, you got to sell your fucking kidney.
To inflation. In 2022, the average student paid $11,400 for a year of public university instead. Damn. Back in 1970, the median income was $9,870
It used to be cheaper. It used to be cheaper to put yourself through an Ivy League university than to go to one of these state schools when you adjust for inflation. Wow.
Per year, about $190 per week. That meant a summer job alone could cover the $400 needed for a full year at the public university.
Wow.
Even the $1,600 tuition for a private school was well within reach of a part-time job during the year. Now, well, good luck covering a single textbook with summer job money. But there is a tiny silver lining to the college debt.
What's that?
Problem. Some sources found that despite their student loans, Gen Z's overall debt isn't as large as that of older generations.
Yeah, because they don't own fucking anything. They Uber everywhere and they don't own a home.
The bad news is that's because older generations are paying off mortgages on homes that Gen Z can't even afford to look at. Well, for Gen Z to be going into all of this debt for college, they're hopefully getting a steady, great-paying job out of it. As you might have guessed, given the tone of this video, no, they're not. The US job market has historically had low unemployment for years now, but Gen Z isn't exactly winning in that equation. On paper, going to college seems like a smart move. College grads have a 2.2% unemployment rate, compared to 4.5% of those who didn't attend. But recent grads are actually doing worse than both groups, with a 5.3% unemployment rate. A number of factors contribute to this, including the more volatile industries, shifting job markets, and the fact that when mass layoffs hit, younger, less experienced workers are usually the first to go. Spencer Kammerman, a University of California at Irvine computer science and engineering graduate, gives one example of this. At 25 years old, he's already been hired and fired from 2 tech companies. Tech is an industry known for frequent mass layoffs, and unfortunately, it's also one that needs a lot of young college-educated adults. Since the last time he was fired, Kammerman has been job hunting for 8 months, applying to hundreds of positions.
It's rough, man. It's rough out there right now for people in tech, young people in tech. I remember when it's been over a year now, I was taking a break from YouTube and I considered going into tech because I remember 5-8 years ago, that was the thing. You could go on YouTube, watch a bunch of tutorials, go to Udemy, go to all of these online teach yourself how to code websites, learn how to code, learn Python, learn JavaScript, and get a job making, $50,000+ a year with no experience. And then within 3 years, making over 6 figures. And so I was like, oh, I remember that. I remember hearing about that. Let me look into it. And then you go on YouTube and start doing research and you're like, dude, you got people with 5 years of experience who know how to code in multiple languages that are struggling to get hired. Yeah, so the whole teach yourself how to code, get a good job with no experience, that ship has fucking sailed, dude.
Gone through lengthy interview processes since then with multiple companies, but he hasn't found a new job yet, thanks in part to massive competition for just a few spots. According to LinkedIn, the use of AI for cover letters and
now AI is about to
resumes has also seriously increased the number of applications per job opening as the applications become easier to do. Eventually, Kammerman ended up where most Gen Zers do, back home with his parents.
Crazy.
As he puts it, it feels like the odds are stacked against us. It's been difficult to get off the ground, but I'm not giving up. Despite his hope, major companies like McKinsey aren't projecting much of a rosy future for Gen Z and their jobs. The McKinsey Global Institute said that by 2030, almost 375 million workers will have to find new jobs, or new industries altogether, due to AI automation. Critics point out that, like anything McKinsey says, this projection should be taken with a massive grain of salt. It relies on a lot of assumptions about how quickly AI will develop and be widely adopted. But even without
dude, it's just a matter of time before we're all wearing fucking goggles in our boxers all day, living in Sim City. We're all in a 400 by 400 square foot cubicle apartment home thing in a building that's 50 stories high, and we're all just crammed together and we get our food delivered to us from a restaurant that is in the actual building we live in. And that's going to be everybody. That's going to be everybody. And what do you do for a living? How do you subsist? You watch ads. That's where we're going. Everybody just watches ads, and you get a credit. You get a Tesla credit every month, and you get to spend a portion of that on one of the companies that advertise to you. You own nothing. You're nothing. You're just a consumer, a battery. We're in the Matrix.
Technology threatening to replace them, Gen Z is still having trouble finding the kinds of jobs high schoolers used to get for pocket change. For example, the decline of brick-and-mortar stores and the rise of e-commerce means the once reliable world of retail work is increasingly unsteady. And the lack of job security once Gen Z gets into the workforce doesn't make it any easier to make a steady income, let alone plan out savings and retirement accounts. And that's partly because of the rise of the gig economy, which has converted a lot of salaried positions into contract positions. 36% of U.S. workers are in the gig economy, which is growing 3 times faster than the regular workforce. It's not just Uber drivers and Postmates delivery either. At 40% of companies, 1 in 4 workers is now a part of the gig economy instead of in a full-time salaried position. Though there are some big benefits to gig work depending on what it is, setting your own hours, for example, it's not very stable. It doesn't come with benefits, and most gig work isn't well paid either. In addition, for better paid full-time jobs, many bosses and hiring managers have a dim view of Gen Z employees and would rather not hire them in the first place. Researchers asked employers what they'd prefer to do when they had a job vacancy, ranking a series of actions, among them hiring a Gen Z employee. They found that some employers will go to extreme lengths to avoid hiring Gen Z.
Dang!
45% said they'd rather hire a freelancer or get a retired employee back. 37% said they'd rather make AI do the job. And 30% would rather leave the position unfilled. So, what financial approach is Gen Z using to build their future? For some, the answer is giving up on the future entirely. 23-year-old
This is why we have a gooning epidemic. Dudes are giving up on everything and just gonna goon their way till death.
Sophie expressed her thoughts on the economic cards stacked against her and her generation. We've got climate change.
They're just waiting for the collapse of society. That's the reality. A lot of Gen Z young dudes, they're just like, yeah, it's gonna fall apart soon enough. It's got to. And when it does, we will rise again.
It's like, are we even going to be here to retire? I don't necessarily feel worried. It's more like helplessness. COVID definitely didn't help in that regard. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, older Gen Z kids were just entering college or the workforce, at a time when they should have been networking, honing their social skills, and getting some hands-on experience. They were sent home and they had to wait out some of their most formative years. Young people found themselves in the midst of a job crisis as industries either told workers to go remote or laid them off. Some started new jobs where they never even got to meet their bosses or their teams to get some good mentorship and networking opportunities. And college students didn't make vital in-person connections that could help them enter the job market with recommendations after graduation. Beyond all of these factors, there is one more reason that Gen Z is the poorest generation, one that doesn't get discussed often because they were born that way. Let us explain. Economic inequality has been increasing for decades in the U.S., as is obvious when looking at young people's financial status today. The Federal Reserve says the average net worth for people under 35 is $76,300. If that sounds impressive and wrong to you, well, that's because it's way off base for most young adults. The median young adult has a net worth of only $13,900.
And I bet you that's wrapped up in their car.
The average is just thrown off because of a small percentage of young adults who are either very high earning or very high inheriting.
OnlyFans models and streamers.
What about the Gen Zers who inherit nothing? Because in the US, incomes and birth rates are correlated, and generally people below poverty level tend to have more kids than people above the poverty level. In 2005, in the middle of Gen Z being born, those with an income below poverty level had a birth rate of 95, while those with an income at 200% of poverty level or more had a birth rate of 45, which means there are disproportionately more kids being born into poverty compared to the general population. And in the US, with lower rates of social mobility and fewer public safety nets compared—
Bro, this is why the elites in a society always get captured and murdered. And I'm not encouraging that shit at all. I'm not saying that's bad. But this is why it happens, because poor people always outbreed rich people. And eventually the inequality gaps get so massive and there are just so many poor people and they just get tired of watching rich people eat fucking avocado toast and drink their fucking frappes at Starbucks. And then one day they're just like, I'm just going to take what you got. And that's how it always goes, man.
To other developed economies. Being born into poverty often means it's really hard to leave.
Or the elite then establish like a fucking, corrupt society, a corrupt government. If it doesn't go that way, it goes the way of like Russia or like communist China, where the elites, the people in control, they enlist the police or the military and they pay them well. Their families get fed well. North Korea, fascist states. And they just keep the population in check. They take away everybody's guns, and then you're fucked. You're just eating cold potatoes forever and sleeping in potato sacks and eating potato bread. I don't know. I just feel like poverty is very potato based.
Even Gen Zs born into poverty sat at a serious disadvantage. They often get a lower quality education and have fewer opportunities for higher education, making it even harder to break out of the cycle. On top of that, they can't rely on parental financial help or stay at home rent-free for long, something a lot of Gen Z needs just to get by. So, Gen Z kids brought up in poverty often become poor Gen Z young adults. Despite this, there are a few encouraging signs. The Atlanta Fed found that wages for 16 to 24-year-olds rose 8.6% in 2024, compared to 5.2% of the general population.
Whoa, that's amazing.
So perhaps companies are finally realizing they need to pay their young workers a respectable wage. Student loan forgiveness helped a lot of people claw their way out of debt and be able to start saving. An expanded program could set young adults up for better financial futures. Stronger laws protecting employees from random firings and guaranteeing benefits for gig workers could also provide some stability for Gen Z adults. But those programs are unlikely to happen soon, and the longer-term view doesn't look great, especially with poverty rates for Gen Alpha equal to those of Gen Z, 16%. Is Gen Z truly the poorest generation, or is this just the usual?
Yeah, man, it's looking grim for Gen Z. But you know me, I can't leave you guys without a word of encouragement. Ultimately, your reality is 1000% dictated by your internal monologue and your internal dialogue, what you say to yourself, what you believe about yourself and the world that you live in. The man who says he can and the man who says he can't, they're both correct. They're both right. So ultimately, if you assume the state of somebody who lives in a world of abundance, well, that will be your experience. I have experienced this multiple times in my life. I've experienced it, lost sight of it, reaped the consequences of losing sight of it, became aware of it again, started applying it, reaping the benefits once again. So, don't make that mistake. Just understand this, apply it, and stick with it. And your life, it can be amazing. It will be amazing. All you have to do is believe.